Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Lang, and I'm so glad you found us here on the DO254 channel. 11 years ago, I created a set of presentations that were quite popular with folks who were seeking basic information about DO254. Since then, this channel has had thousands of viewers. But let me just say that since 2013, there's actually been a lot of changes, so I thought it was time for an update. I've recreated the original set of 4 DO254 Basics presentations and brought them up to date. So if you're seeking the latest information on DO254 and you really are just starting out at a basic level, you have found the right place. In this presentation, part 1, I'm going to explain what DO254 is. And in the 4-part DO254 Basics presentation series, I'll answer everything you wanted to know about DO254 but were afraid to ask. Okay, well that might be a slight overstatement, but I will give you an informative introduction and point you to where you can get a lot more information and help. So let's get started. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. DO254 is a document. The document title is Design Assurance Guidance for Airborne Electronic Hardware. Now there are 2 things I want to point out in that title. First, the words design assurance. What does that mean? Basically it means developing the hardware to an acceptable level of safety. Second, the words Airborne Electronic Hardware, which is often referred to by its acronym AEH. You hear AEH, think hardware. This document applies to electronic hardware, AEH, that is intended for airborne functions. In other words, in aircraft. The document was developed in the 1990s by a special committee formed under the RTCA. It was Committee SC 180. The document was first published in the year 2000. And finally, in 2005, the FAA invoked the document as a means to comply with federal regulations. It was then re-invoked with some changes in 2022. I'll explain all of this further in the next few slides. Okay, I just mentioned the RTCA in the context of the committee that developed DO254. If you've not heard of the RTCA, it's a very old industry organization, founded in 1935 in fact, whose full title is the Radio Technical Commission for Aeronautics. It's so old, in fact, that that name doesn't even really make sense anymore, so they just go by RTCA. Their website is www.rtca.org, and on that website, it states that the RTCA is the premier public-private partnership venue for developing consensus among diverse, competing interests on critical aviation modernization issues in an increasingly global enterprise. That is in fact what they do when they form special committees like SC 180 to develop guidance for many different aspects of aviation. The DO254 document is formally referred to as the RTCA/DO254 document. It's a product of this organization's efforts and it was published by them. Therefore, it must be purchased from their website. So let me say this another way. DO254 is not a free document. You have to go to rtca.org and purchase it. That is unless you're from Europe. You see, the European Organization for Civil Aviation Equipment, also known as EUROCAE, had a hand in its development too. They formed a working group that also helped develop the European version of the document, which is called ED80. The documents are fully harmonized, meaning that they have the same content. So both DO254 and ED80 are the same thing. All right, that covers how DO254 or ED80 came to be and where you can get it. But you're probably here today watching this video because you've heard things about DO254 and want to understand more. The first thing people usually hear is that DO254 compliance is difficult. Well, what makes it so tricky? In my mind, at least, there are 3 key reasons: scope, style, and age. In terms of scope, the intent of the original document was to cover all electronics, from the smallest component to multi-board LRUs. The This was changed when the document was first invoked, and from there it's actually evolved even more. So understanding what DO-254 actually applies to is the first area that makes it tricky. Second, the style of the document is intentionally non-prescriptive. This just simply means that it doesn't prescribe how to comply. It just presents objectives that must be met by very non-specific activities, and there are few, if any really, examples. Finally, the age of the document makes it tricky. It's old. The folks who developed it in the 1990s were looking at electronics that were far simpler than anything we have today. Technology has advanced so much and so rapidly, but DO-254 hasn't changed. At least the original document hasn't. But additional documents that do clarify, and in some cases even redefine DO-254 compliance, have been released over the years. So it's not enough to just read and try to understand and comply with DO-254. You have to be aware of and well-versed on numerous other documents as well. I'll get into that more in part 4 of this series, so hang on a bit for more on that topic. Now, I've mentioned the word invocation a few times. What I mean by this is that it takes a while for something like DO-254 to become accepted policy. As I said, it was published by the RTCA in the year 2000, and then it sat there for 5 years while the policymakers tried to figure out what exactly to do with it. Finally, in 2005, the FAA invoked DO-254 as policy through an advisory circular known as an AC, or specifically AC 2152. This invocation meant that the FAA formally announced that following RTCA/DO-254, the document's formal name, would be an acceptable means of compliance to the federal regulations that govern aircraft design and safety. I'm not going to get into how all of that works in any detail. You don't really need to understand it all. Just know that DO-254 was formally invoked by the FAA in 2005. But in doing so, they actually changed the scope of it. If you read this AC, you can see that they only applied it to hardware they defined as, quote, custom microcoded components, and only those with design assurance levels, which are now called development assurance levels, of A, B, and C. Now, over the next 18 years or so, the scope creeped quite a bit, and technology also evolved at a mind-blowing pace. So in 2022, a new version of this AC, AC 20-152A, was issued by the FAA. This AC really has a lot of meat in it. It's probably the most important document to be aware of besides DO-254 itself. It, in fact, expanded the scope, added a lot of objectives, and in many ways clarified certain confusing things that were in the original document. And I'm going to get into that more in part 4 of this series. Okay, that's enough for you to digest for this moment. You now understand what DO-254 is and where to get it. So if you don't have your copy, go to rtca.org, that website, and buy it right now. Now, once you have a copy in hand, you're ready to watch the next short presentation in the series, which covers how to navigate the document. I'll share my own sites on the content and layout, and will help you really understand the gold that's in that document and how to interpret it. I plan to give you a good, solid, high-level understanding of DO-254, but if you need to wrap up for an upcoming project, what you really need to do is seek out more formal training and probably hire a consultant. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. DO-254 is hard. So if your team doesn't have internal experience, if you don't have someone on your team who is highly experienced in DO-254, I highly recommend that you find resources in the industry that can help. If you need a reference, my suggestion is Patmos Engineering Services or Patmos-Eng, patmos-eng.com. This company is headed by an award-winning FAA designated engineer, Tammy Reeve. She has over 3 decades of experience in the industry and is very well respected. So if you want a knowledgeable, highly regarded consulting and engineering company that truly has a lot of integrity, not to mention very fair prices, I'd suggest Patmos. Also, another website to visit to pick up a lot of free resources or other aids as your project progresses is www.airworthinesscert.com. For now, go to that website and check out their free stuff. There's a lot of value, a lot of documents, advice, all kinds of stuff there for free. So that wraps up our first segment. I hope you continue watching and learning.